PLD PJ Campbell. Two mediocre white dudes on film. Because frankly, we know you don't have enough of that in your life. So we're here to give you more. And without further ado, here are two mediocre white dudes on film.
It's me, it's PLD. That's how it works, right?
Something like that. You don't have quite the panache that I do, but I'll let it go for this
Wow. Wow, I don't have the panache. All right, you cheesy motherfucker.
Not to say my phrase. You have a panache of your own, but now when he starts to, trying to acclimate with my phrase, then it's not.
Well, someone had to, put you in your place. You're getting too big for your britches over here.
Oh, is that what it is?
That's what it is.
Yeah, I just thought I was getting too old for this shit.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we're both getting too old for this shit.
That's fair.
That's true.
The question is Lethal Weapon getting too old for its shit at this point in the franchise? We're going to find out. But it's been a couple weeks. We started our bi-weekly schedule. We actually planned out the rest of the year, which is exciting for us. And if you like horror, we will be getting back to horror. But we still have a few things on our docket before we get back to horror.
I mean, look, I'm excited for some more stabby fun.
Yes.
As far as the horror side of our podcast is concerned. But I'm actually more excited that there's some rip-roaring pulp serial style adventuring to be had first.
Yes, indeed. We like to punch Nazis on this podcast, and this series attempts to also like to punch Nazis. So
we should all want to punch Nazis. Just in general, punching Nazis. That's the one thing in the world that we should all agree on. It's okay to punch Nazis.
Absolutely. There is also a movie coming out soon that we might have to do a bonus episode, even though we just declared bi-weekly. We might still have to squeeze in a bonus episode because for the first time since we started to mediocre white dudes on film, we have a movie coming out in a franchise that we have already covered. I mean, besides Halloween, because we were leading up to Halloween.
Right.
But we did the Scream franchise. That was the first franchise we did. And of course, Scream 6 is coming out. So we might just have to be completists and squeeze in a bonus episode to cover Scream 6 when that comes out. I think that's the only the right thing to do.
I mean, or we could just pretend it didn't happen. Then people just have to wonder what we think. I mean, there's always that too.
The people need to know what these mediocre white dudes think about movies.
That's true. That's fair. You know what, man?
This is every white man podcast on
yeah,
YouTube.
Pretty much.
That's
I know people care about what we think when it comes to movies. I don't know why, but you do. So we'll talk about Scream 6, I guess.
Especially the stabby movies, because that's our bread and butter.
I mean, stabby movies seem to be the ones that people like to hear about the most. So I do respect it because I myself enjoy the stabby.
There's some kind of joke here.
I'm also strange and unusual.
There is some kind of joke here where I can't quite get there, where we're talking about bread and butter and stabby, because you don't use a bread and butter knife to stab people with, but maybe we use a sharp knife to butter our bread with. I don't know. There's some kind of joke in there. We'll figure it out eventually.
But what if the killer was using like a butter knife?
Ooh, that would really hurt, I would think. I mean,
it would take a long time. It would almost be excruciating.
I think it's actually a good way to do torture in a woman. That'd be a
That's
way
what
to
I'm saying, right?
Painful, right?
Yeah, like we might have to look into this as a thing. This should be in a movie.
It should be. The bread and butter knife killer.
I think that there's something here. There's something here.
Something in the minds of someone somewhere has thought of this. I'm sure of it. In the millennia of twisted minds we've had, we're gonna find it. If not, we'll have to make it happen.
I think Christopher Landon should do something with this.
I'm okay with that. I'm okay with
By the way, how is it that Christopher Landon had a brand new movie come out last weekend on Netflix and it feels like no one knows that Christopher Landon had a brand new horror movie come out on Netflix.
I barely knew it. I'll be honest, I
That's my
forgot all about
point.
it until somebody mentioned it. I'm like, oh, that's right. I haven't watched it yet, but I'm just shocked about it. It's a good question. I think the answer lies in the fact that we are still kind of making our way back to theaters in a way, and I
But
kind
it's
of
a
feel like
Netflix movie.
I know it's a Netflix movie. Like it's kind of one of those things where like we're still trying to find our way in the theater streaming world, and sometimes I think things are easier to miss when they stream, especially on a series on a whatever a streaming service such as Netflix, who doesn't do a very good job ever with marketing its movies.
Good. Perfect. This is exactly what I wanted to get into. Fuck Netflix and their half-assed marketing for things. There's no world where a movie by Christopher Landon, the dude who did Freaky and Happy Death Day 1 and 2, this dude is stupid talented, and they're barely promoting this movie, and it's got David Harbour and Anthony Mackie, and David Harbour is like Netflix's, well, bread and butter thanks to Stranger Things. So why are we not promoting this goddamn movie?
Is there anything Netflix has marketed well? I mean, Stranger Things seems to be the one that they do market pretty well. You always seem to know when that's happening. Cobra Kai does decent, but I feel it's like more the producers who actually promote it than Netflix does. What does Netflix? Does Netflix promote anything? Why would you not promote your stuff?
I don't know. It just doesn't make any damn sense to me, man. And
That's
I
just
just think about it all the time. And specifically, again, this weekend in particular, because again, this movie is out and it doesn't feel like anyone's talking about it.
That's a sad thing too, because especially when someone like you get a Christopher Landon, who's a young, talented director, like people like a Scorsese, a Spielberg, they can kind of get away with it. Like if they didn't have any marketing, you still find out. Even if they have a miss, it's fine. They could have 10 misses in a row. You're still going to go see a Steven Spielberg movie. You're still going to go see a Martin Scorsese movie. Someone like Christopher Landon, who doesn't have like that long of a track record. I mean, don't get me wrong, I loved all his movies so far, but he's still kind of a younger director. He's the guy that can get lost in the shuffle and not ever make anything again. And what a waste that would be.
Dude, 100% what a waste that would be, considering that dude is how talented.
Yeah.
And I just, man, we're already in this world where we're not probably getting a Happy Death Day 3 or
It's
the
so
crossover
sad.
film that he was
So
trying to
sad.
do. So, like, at this point, burying another one of his movies on Netflix just feels like a slap in the face.
Maybe we will get it when Juan and Blum get their house in order. So I feel like Blum is like maybe concentrating too many things. When he has a new house, he might be looking for projects to do that are have some IP attached to them, kind of thing. Maybe we will. I still want to hold out. I'm trying to be optimistic here that one day we will get the Happy Death Day 3 or even the cross. I'd rather have the Happy Death Day 3, I'll be honest with you. But I'll take the crossover as well because I like both movies and I like both actresses. So I like Landon. So maybe there's a world where after the Blum Juan merger thing happens, maybe we'll get something. So I mean, everybody still wants to do it. So how can it not happen? Honestly, you know what I mean?
I mean, I would love to be wrong.
Yeah.
And my God, man, like, I just feel bad because I think he's so talented. And I already liked where Happy Death Day 2 ended.
Yeah, me too.
And I needed to follow up on that. And I just don't want Landon to like disappear because I really like his movies, and I don't want a studio like Netflix burying him.
Maybe we should do a Landon series on here at some point. Do Happy Death Day, Happy Day 2, Freaky, the new movie that
What was it? Scout's Guide.
Scott's Guide. Yep.
Yeah, and then
Yeah,
he also wrote a handful of the Paranormal Activity movies, including the most recent one that came out last year or the year before on Paramount Plus.
I feel like that's its own series. I feel like Paramount Active, we should probably do it on its own.
Well,
Separate
I
thing.
would say you could at least do the last one, the marked, not the marked ones. Shoot, what was the last one called? But it was totally separate from the rest of the series.
Yeah.
And it's more like a cult film, like not a like cult underground film, but like a film about a cult.
Yeah.
Yes, it's a totally different movie than the rest.
It could be something I guess we could do.
I'm just saying.
Next
My
of
point
Kin.
is,
Yeah, Next of Kin. That's what it is. That's what it's called. Next of Kin from 2021. Yeah, either way, but I get your point. It's possible. Either way, let's just do. I think we do Christopher Landon. I think we do Happy Death Day because I really want to watch Happy Death Day 2 again because that movie's gotten such flack over the the veering into sci-fi, and I was all here for it. To me, it's like we had Alien, which is a horror, and Aliens, which is sci-fi action, and nobody bats an eye about that. And so, like,
Yeah,
why not twist it into a different thing? I think it's great.
I thought that it was really compelling and
Yeah,
interesting that it took such a big
love it.
swing to do something so different, and I
Yeah,
think that Landon has a good hold on how you can take different genres and mash them together, or different genre ideas and mash them together, because similarly, Freaky takes, the
mhm,
Freaky Friday thing and it mixes it with the slasher. And Happy Death Day was taking a slasher and mixing it with Groundhog Day.
right.
Happy Death Day 2 is a slasher, but in the like Back to the Future 2 lens.
Yes, yes,
And
great way to
I
put it.
find it really interesting. Yeah. And you know
For
what's funny?
God, sorry.
Insidious Chapter 2 does the same thing.
Yes, you're right. You're absolutely right. Absolutely right. I was going to say that, like, for a movie that's so hinged on about repeating itself, like Groundhog Day, in a genre that's so easy to just basically remake the first film with a sequel, Christopher Land took a swing. That should be applauded, I think, not
Mhm.
like decried. About. I mean,
Well,
you
the
don't.
other thing that's weird to me is, like, yeah, it made a lot less than the first one, but they still weren't made for very much, which
Yeah,
is why I'm so confused by the hesitation of doing another one,
it
because
still
you
made money.
yeah, it will still make money.
Even if you put money, even if you have to put less money into it for various whatever it is, but like that's diminishing returns, fine. Give it a little bit less money, you could still make it work, I'm sure. That's why Friday the 13th made it so well in the 80s. And I like Nightmare on Elm Street, same thing. They had a lot of diminishing returns, but they could still make a profit if you do it cheaply enough.
Yeah.
And I think they could do that movie cheaply enough.
Well, I mean, again, the second one made money. It just
Yeah,
made, and it wasn't made for a lot of money.
right.
So it just seems weird to me. It just seems weird. And I know that a part of it also is that, like, Blumhouse is on a pretty big role when you look at stuff like Malignant and Megan and these movies that are making a lot of money. I mean, less said about what happened with Halloween Ends, but even that technically made money. Like,
Right.
there is a world where you can do this thing and
Right.
actually make it work. So I guess my frustration is that Jason Blum never seems like the kind of person to pull the plug on something like that.
Mhm.
And, like, they've already announced an Exorcist trilogy. The first
Right.
one's already done shooting. It opens in October.
That's
So
yeah.
it's just weird to me that this is the one. You know
This
what
is
I'm
the one.
saying? That they,
Yeah.
for whatever reason, seem to have pulled the plug on, even though Landon and everyone seems to want to do it.
Yeah. Very strange. Very strange. But who knows? Maybe when we do it, we do Landon, going through Landon's movies, maybe there'll be a spark of interest, and because we matter so much, so studios will definitely notice that we're
I
covering
mean,
it.
to
So
be fair, it feels like almost every time we start talking about things, then somehow there is like an announcement or something along the way,
right.
and it's happened more than once.
No. Yeah.
So,
Fair point.
maybe you and I will end up willing this into existence.
We'll try. You know what else I'm going to try to will into existence? I'm going to try to will into existence somebody at New Line and Warner Brothers to get somebody who can talk to Mike Flanagan's agents, so that Mike Flanagan can at least even freaking pitch them the idea of doing a Nightmare on Elm Street movie. This interview I saw has still got me enraged. I know I went to you a couple days ago and raged about
Yep.
it. The fact that Mike Flanagan, one of the premier horror directors of our time, has an idea he wants to pitch for a Nightmare on Elm Street. He's talked about it even with Heather Langenkamp. He wants to do it, and he can't find the people to pitch it to. Like, it's one thing if he pitches something to the studio and the studio decides not to go up on it. I don't like that either because, like, Flanagan, let him do his thing, like we always say. But the fact that he can't even get a place to find it, that this is one of your premier. This is the New Line was the house that Freddie built,
Yeah.
and you don't know where he is. Like, that just blows my mind.
They are squandering Nightmare over at New Line and WB, and it is actually infuriating watching it happen,
It is the worst.
because they have a built-in property that is very
Mhm.
popular, and they should have been figuring this out post 2018's Halloween,
Yes.
because at that point, you strike while the iron's hot. It is now 2023.
Right.
It has been a decade since the reboot.
It's going to, as of next year, it'll be 3 films in 30 years. We
I
had
don't get it.
6 films in the first 10 years. And 3 years since we had Wes Craven's New Nightmare. And one of them, by the way, being Freddy vs. Jason. So it's not even truly a real, like, I mean, it's a nightmare movie.
It is,
but
it's not.
Right. So a real Freddy movie, Wes Craven's New Nightmare, which was almost a reimagining in and of itself, Freddy vs. Jason, and then a reboot. And that's all. How can you not make money on this property? I don't understand. I can't. Somebody explain to me and make it make sense, because it does not make sense to me.
It doesn't make sense, and it's super frustrating. And in a world where horror has been popping off left, right, and center, it is crazy to me that they're not chasing that. And then Scream doing so well, and now we're gonna have had 2 Scream sequels in a year and a half, versus the fact that we can't even get a damn Nightmare movie.
I know.
Now, Friday, I understand that there's all the rights issues and stuff,
Right.
but we're getting a TV show at least, and they've figured out portions of how to get Jason back on screens.
Right. And that's at least something. And I will say, if anybody out there, horror fans that are listening to this, I do understand that with Jason and with Ghostface and the ideas behind that, they are easier to replace than Robert Englund as Freddy Krueger. Robert Englund made the character, so it's kind of hard to see somebody else in the role. And that's part of the reason why I think people had a hard time with 2010. And that's no slight on Jackie Earle Haley. I think he did wonderful with the role. But it is hard seeing somebody else in that role. But with that being said, I think you can still find a way to make it work, and you should at least be giving it a shot, because I guarantee you put this in the theaters. You put A Nightmare on Elm Street in the theaters with Kevin Bacon, like Robert Englund said why he wanted Kevin Bacon to do it. Put anybody in that role, you'll get money back. It'll be exciting. Just give us a good story. Give us a good fun.
And here's the
Freddy
thing,
story.
right? Most people talk about the reboot and all agree about one thing. Jackie Earle Haley was really good in the reboot. So that's not saying that other people can't be Freddy.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I love Robert Englund. Don't get me wrong. But if your holdup is the Robert Englund of it all, it might be time to move on.
It is. And Robert wants to do it. Robert wants you to do it. Robert is being vocal saying, I can't do it anymore. I'm almost 80 or however old he is. I can't run around with my glove anymore. But he's happy to see the continue. He's pitching Kevin Bacon. Like, he wants it to continue.
And you look at that, and I just think about what Candyman just did recently. What a smart way to move that story forward. They built it in a way that curse and that Candyman character could take over the next generation of people. So when you see the Tony Todd thing at the end, it's really striking and exciting, and it reminds you of the past, but you can still move forward.
Right.
And dude, I want a sequel to that movie so bad, because I love the Candyman reboot too.
We should actually, it's another series we're gonna have to do eventually. We have so many series. That's the one bad thing about us going bi-weekly, is that we have so many things we want to cover, and we can't, because we have less time now to do it. We'll be like 80 years old by the time we get to the Candyman franchise. But it's another series I want to do at some point.
Well, I mean, I'll say there's like 2 of them really worth talking about.
True, but we got to do good and bad. We're completists here.
I know.
We have to at least find the good and the bad. So, speaking of the good and the bad, not that this is a bad movie, but this was definitely Lethal Weapon 3 was the first dip down for me in the franchise. I'm interested to see how you feel about it. We've had some discussions about it, but it's been a little bit. So I'm interested to see if a new viewing has done anything for you as far as the things that I saw. Not to say that I hate this movie at all, because I don't. But I do feel like there's a little bit in here that makes it uneven compared to the previous 2, a first step down, so to speak.
I mean, I'll say it up front. I do think this is the weakest film in the franchise.
Yeah.
Here we are. It's 1992, 3 years after the massive success of Lethal Weapon 2. And this movie gets the band back together again. I mean, that they even said the magic is back again. Like, that was the tagline for the movie.
Yeah.
And it's a fun, smart tagline, even though it looks like really terrible early Photoshop with the Joe Pesci on the poster.
It does.
It's a, like, have you ever looked at it? Something about it just doesn't look right.
I agree. It's on our cover too. Look at our cover. Just look at our
Yeah.
cover. We have it in there. It's just bring it up right here for the viewers. Sorry, audio listeners. But yeah, there it is. It just looks a little wrong. It looks like,
Yeah.
oh, we forgot that Joe Pesci's in this movie, so we got to just throw him in the background there.
Yeah, like, it's just kind of a weird thing. I don't know exactly what it is, but the interesting thing is, as far as this one is concerned, there's something very funny that there is an argument to be made. Like I said, this is easily the weakest of the franchise,
Right.
and yet there's something we don't talk about is it's also the best looking of the franchise, and that's because John DeBont was the cinematographer on this one, and
Yes.
this movie feels more cinematic, I feel like, than the first two and the third. And I don't mean that as a dig to those movies. They're all great, but there's something about the action and the way that this one in particular is shot that makes it feel different, and like the action beats are really exciting in a very different way.
It's definitely a crisper looking film. I'll definitely give
Yeah.
it that. In a way, I think it works both as a pro and a con. It works as a pro because it is beautiful. I do think it's I agree with you. This is probably the best shot of the films thus far. At the same time, it also distinguishes itself and makes it stand out, so it feels like it's a little less part of the franchise in a way, if that makes sense. Like, it kind of feels different. So
It
it's like, is it?
does, because it actually feels a little too shiny.
Yeah, that's exactly that's where I was heading. Kind of because like Lethal Weapon, the original Lethal Weapon is kind of like, as I watched it again, it's kind of a dirty movie. It's kind of a down
Well,
to
we
earth
talked about that ad nauseum. Like,
Right,
it's gritty. It feels disgusting.
right. And the second one is more of the same. I mean, there's definitely a little more. We talked about how Shane Black's like Jeffrey Bone came in and did some uncredited writing on there. Taking over for Shane Black, and that's where the humor came in. And I think you'll find that in truth, the best Lethal Weapon is a Shane Black story with a Jeffrey Boehm touch up.
Yeah.
Jeffrey Boehm added some great moments to it, but when Jeffrey Boehm's on his own, it feels like he doesn't know exactly where he wants to go. And that's my biggest nitpick of this film, is that there's times where it feels like it's almost a parody of itself.
Well, the
And
other
then
thing too, to your point,
Mhm.
is that Bohm doesn't. He's not the sole credited writer on this one.
Right.
And one of the things that's kind of weird is that it's also written by Robert Mark Kamen.
Right.
And the people who don't know who that is, but you probably recognize the name, you know why? Because he wrote all the Karate Kid movies.
Yeah. And
And so, like, that's such a weird pivot. And this
Mhm.
dude also had done work on, like, Under Siege and The
Right.
Fugitive, but the ones that he was always known for were the Karate Kid movies.
Right. And actually, funnily enough, I read that Carrie Fisher was actually an uncredited script doctor on the film as well.
I believe that,
And I bet
because she
that
did a lot of that.
and I can tell. I almost feel like she did a lot of that. And a lot of time, what she did, she was brought on to like hammer down some of the women's dialogue to get a better voice for women. I bet you 100%. I bet you that she took on a lot of the Rene Russo line, like Rene Russo character. And that's why, quite frankly, Rene Russo is one of the highlights of this film. I know we're going to get into that in a bit, but The Rock is franchise Viagra. I think that Rene Russo has a claim to that that stake here. I mean, she really, to me, I want to say saved the movie. It's not like that dire, but she added so much to it. He added, like I said, a lot to it. I said before, like when I mentioned before, that we had at the beginning, it was almost a parody of itself. But there are also times where there is some deep, heartfelt stories, just like the original first two Lethal Weapons. There's those moments with Murtaugh that are really heartfelt. Really, what's the word I'm looking for? They supersede the general. They rise above the traditional action movie, which is why Lethal Weapon has always been such a successful franchise. I just feel that Lethal Weapon and Lethal Weapon 2 merge the two together better than Lethal Weapon 3 did. Lethal Weapon 3, action one side, heartfelt moments on the other. It's like they felt like two different movies that they just kind of like slammed together instead of merged
Yeah,
together.
and again, I mean, I'm gonna point to it. I think that there's something lost in translation with the writing, which is why neither of them came back for the fourth one. But like looking at Robert Mark Kamen's filmography, and you realize like the dude made an entire career after a while just co-writing stuff with Luc Besson, and
Yeah.
then you see what happened with Taken 2, you see what happened with Taken 3, you see what happened with Columbiana, and to be honest, they all kind of have that too. Like the first Taken is lightning in a bottle. but it's not the script that makes that movie good. It's the rest of it. So it feels like this movie is living in a world where they want the family comedy aspect of what the Lethal Weapon franchise is, but they want to have more of like an intensive action side that the series hadn't quite dived into, because we've always talked about that Lethal Weapon is like, as far as it's concerned, the story dictates the action doesn't dictate the story. This one feels like it flips that.
Yeah, and to its detriment. Even if you put in the opening sequence here. Well, actually, that's one thing we talked about at one point. I know I talked about other people as well. The beginning sequence, we have that explosion in the building, and when I talk about being a parody of itself, this is where it starts already. Right away, I'm kind of like, okay, so I know Riggs is the wild man, but he's kind of less of a wild man now. And I almost feel like this was put in to say he's still a wild man. He hasn't had much growth since the first film. He's going to go in there, not wait for the bomb squad, just like let it go. And is there humorous bits in there with Murtaugh? Absolutely. Is it funny? Absolutely. But it kind of felt off. It just felt like an excuse for a big explosion to open the movie. Lethal Weapon 2 had this great opening action sequence. One of my favorite parts of Lethal Weapon 2 is how it opens right away. We're on the freeway. We're chasing things around. We're chasing cars. We're flipping cars. We're having this big action sequence. We're introducing the characters well. But the end of it is something that leads into the rest of the film. It's important to the rest of the film. This is this big explosion and action beat that just feels like an excuse, and it helps them. Okay, so it puts them back on the captain has to just knock them back down to the beat cops, and that lasts all of what like 20 minutes. So at the end of the day, it's kind of like, okay, so that's a disconnect there for me.
Yeah, I don't disagree with what you're saying, but I actually love the opening regardless.
I mean, it's a lot of fun. It's a lot of fun. I'll give you that.
Well, and that's why, because it's fun. And I definitely understand why. And it's so funny because when you look at this, you can tell how troubled the production was comparative to the first two, because Donner had always demanded rewrites on the first two movies as it is. We've talked about that before. The problem is that they came in, Donner didn't love the original Jeffrey Boehm script. Then they come in and Mark does rewrites, and Donner doesn't like those rewrites. So Boehm is brought back
Right.
because he tries to work on the movie again. And so Boehm gets 2 writing credits because of that. It evolves, but you can feel it. To your point, I think that something was lost in that you can feel, I don't even know if it's parody being the right word, but it feels like someone who watched Lethal Weapon but didn't quite understand Lethal Weapon. And so it almost feels tonally inept in
Yeah.
trying to pull back on like that nature. And I guess the other thing though is that we have to remember where we are when this one picks up, because after Lethal Weapon 2, I would expect the movie to be a little more lighthearted, especially on the stuff with Riggs, because of where we find Riggs at the very end of it. And he's finally like put to bed all of the trauma and stuff, if you will, after he survives. However, then the movie has this other side to itself where Murtaugh has like this incredibly dark, challenging storyline that is so good that feels almost out of place in a movie that is joking about everything else.
Well, I think part of the problem I want to insert there is that because the first two films were really, I mean, like they're a duo. Riggs and Murtaugh are a duo, definitively. But the first two films are definitely more about Riggs's coming to terms with his past. There's definitely Murtaugh has some subplot ideas, but if you had to point out a main storyline beat, you're watching Riggs's through line. And this one, it kind of flips a little bit. Riggs is happy for the most part. He's found his family for the most part. So it's time to give Murtaugh something else and becomes a Murtaugh story instead, which is not necessarily a bad idea. Actually, in fact, it's probably a good idea because he couldn't. I almost felt we mentioned this last time. I almost felt like it was too. It was like too much for to have Riggs go through what he went through again. It almost felt like it was like, oh my god, anybody would have cracked at this point, and yet he's
Right.
still going on. So to put him through it a third time, something like that, I think that would have been an awful choice. It would have been like kind of like, okay, this is just dumb at this point. So instead to flip it and have such a great connection with Rene Russo's character to do it, and I love their camaraderie out of the way.
Rene Russo is like the shining star of this movie.
100%. I mean, I honestly, and as much as I love Riggs and Murtaugh, I would actually love to. I wouldn't have minded seeing a spinoff of Riggs and Lorna together the whole time because they had just great chemistry together. And I would take the three of them even better. But that's what it was. It's good to have Riggs as that. And when Riggs is happy, though, we still need that conflict somewhere. So you turn to Murtaugh, who has a very darker side to him in this. And I think that's a good thing. But again, it ends up becoming uneven with how it's presented.
Well, and to your point, too, the other reason that it's interesting is because now when you do this, you do what Back to the Future 3 does. And I say that out loud, and people are going to be like, what the fuck are you talking about? And they're I know how Back to the Future 3's reception is. So they're going to go, you fucking idiot. Like, why would you even want to compare them? Well, I really like Back to the Future 3. It's my favorite of those two sequels. And Back to the Future 3 does something very brilliant, and it flips the character dynamics where Marty is the one who has to be in control and is like the adult in the situation, if you will, over Doc. This is a movie that forces Murtaugh to see what it felt like to be Riggs in a capacity. And I think that goes a long way because now Riggs has to be the one who's pulling him out of this anxiety and this depression because, you know, we've kind of been beating around it, but Murtaugh kills a child. He doesn't, you know, it was just one of
a child, like a child, a friend, but not even a child, but a friend of his kid, which is even worse. I mean, it's bad enough killing a kid, but like killing a kid who is your son's friend, who you grew up with, you brought him into your house at a point, like that's, I can't even imagine the heartbreak.
Well, and not just the other thing is credit where credit's due. I don't think movies always tend to lean on the fact that when people kill people in the line of duty, generally there is some sort of like traumatic experience that goes with that. And people like action movies don't deal with that very often. And so to actually lean on that was kind of an interesting story beat. And it works because Danny Glover gives it his all.
Yeah, he really does.
And the funeral sequence is heartbreaking.
Oh yeah, I mean, like it's like you're watching it detached as an audience member. You see like the mother of the kid like slap him, and you feel for him because you're kind of like, in part of you know, like, well, the kid was not exactly just as a kid. He was shooting him fucking or rifle at or whatever, magazine like M16 or whatever. I forget whatever it was. But yeah, he's shooting at him. So it was that kind of thing. Riggs had to say, this is not a kid. This guy wasn't playing with a toy. He was shooting at you. He was trying to kill you. You had to kill him. That's what it was. But at the same time, you get why the mother's upset. The mother's a grieving mother. So it's just this both worlds coming in where like Danny Glover's trying to make things right. She's hitting him. And the father has that great moment. You want to help? Get the guy who put that weapon in my kid's hand. And you see the family supporting him. You see Riggs supporting him. Beyond the funeral sequence, one of my favorite sequences in this whole film is the Murtaugh drunken on the boat sequence.
And that was the scene I was going to get to your point, because where do we see Riggs at the beginning of Lethal Weapon?
Right.
Drunk next to the ocean.
Yep. And it's just a flip around. And then Riggs is going to be the one who has to talk him out of it. And Riggs, I mean, if you're counting on Riggs to be the sane one, that's a tough sell, but it works out very well. You believe it because you know that Riggs has gotten that far. He's made that growth over the first two movies. I love the whole sequence because Danny Glover does give it all. They have those kind of humorous. They keep the humor about it where it could sink into a too much level, because like if you sunk into that funeral, the level of the funeral scene throughout the entire bit of it, I think it drags the movie down too much a place you don't want to go for what Lethal Weapon wants to be. So you add a little bit of the humor to it with Riggs trying to like with the bottle and all this stuff and throw it out, and they go into the water and you kind of have those humorous moments where it's two guys really like being brothers, being family, where like they can like say, yeah, you just punched at me, you just punched me, we just went into the water. They can turn to the guy and go, yeah, we're working on a case, scotch, and they start laughing at each other because they get it.
It's so good. That's one of my favorite moments in the entire movie.
Same thing. It's because it's just them together. And I will say, I'm very glad that you decided not to do something. In one of the first drafts, Riggs actually slept with Murtaugh's daughter, with Rene, one of the first drafts. And that would have been a horrible choice. Alluding to it, fine and funny. Like,
well, the flirting thing is much better than You know
Because
what I
once you go
mean?
over that line, it just doesn't make any sense anymore. It's kind of like, oh, come on, Riggs wouldn't do that. Riggs wouldn't do that. That's just not his. That's like a daughter to him. But Murtaugh suspecting it as the overprotective father or whatever, that works. It leads to moments like we got. But so I'm glad that didn't work. I was also part of the first
Yeah,
half. I'm sorry, go ahead.
I'm glad that. No, I was gonna say I'm really glad that they dropped that because I think that would have been a very big mistake.
100%. It would have been a riff.
Um, the way that relationship's always been built out was better to never actually lean in it farther
Right.
than that.
She had a
Um,
childhood crush on him, which is kind of we get that. Mel Gibson's a
yeah,
good-looking guy, and he's a part of the family in a way. He's a non-family member who hangs out there a lot. He's exciting. I get that, and him kind of playing off that, it's not like he's like leading her on or anything. He just kind of like he knows she got a childhood crush, and he knows that kind of maybe needles Roger a little bit, so he'll laugh at it or whatever. But it's a fun, harmless, innocent thing.
well, and instead we get the better moments of Riggs being the protective uncle, father type
Yeah,
of her, which is why the sequence on the back lot is so good when he thinks that she's being
taxed or
taken
whatever.
like yeah, like and so he jumps in and he ends up fucking up the scene and then the director tries to fire her and like it's so good.
I can't remember the exact quote, but one of my favorite lines. He's like, if this was any other day, I'd be knocking some sense into you. Oh, it is. Whatever. Very, very Gibson. Very
And then
racist.
just the very like continually kind of bothering the director until he's like, "So she fired? Yeah, she's fired. I'm sorry, is she fired?" And he keeps doing it, and no, we're good.
Out of the way
And the whole
back.
yeah,
He's like a director with Murtaugh. He's like, did I get her job back? Did she get a raise? We're good.
yeah, and I love we'd really like to have you back on the production.
So
Oh, it's so good. Like, see, there's a lot of really good stuff in this movie.
there
Um,
is, yeah,
there really is, and credit where credit's due too. To the point of all this with the Jean de Bont and the way he frames and shoots things. The fact that WB went out of their way to like do the entire finale in an actual basically graveyard of houses that were never finished and they were going to have to be demolished anyway, so they put money into making sure that they could burn this place to the ground.
right.
It feels real. The demolition of the building at the beginning and the end of the movie, similarly, they put money into doing it so they could get real destruction, and that's something that like John DeBont as a filmmaker is so good at. And it's so funny because I had Twister on at the bar over the weekend because it was playing on TNT. So I put it on and it's like
Right.
no one could shoot a movie quite like Jean DeBont. And there's something about the way he captures all that and the money they put into making sure that these action pieces felt visceral and real that really work in the movie's favor. Again, kind of different than the first two and almost to the point that it feels a little different in
Mhm.
like tonally and things like that. But we also get these like great action beats on the freeway,
Yeah.
which leads to that great shot that anyone has ever seen of Riggs on the back of the motorcycle
Right.
and like coming out of the smoke on the freeway before going over the ledge. Like that stuff is so good.
So iconic now. Yeah.
Yeah. It just
Absolutely.
works.
It does on many different angles. And I want to say again too, like it just brought up again. Again, we talked about Rene Russo a little bit, but that character has is a very good chance of not working. Like you're inserting a character that's going to take away from a duo. We love Riggs and Murtaugh, so you're inserting someone into that chemistry. Now they did it well with Joe Pesci in Lethal Weapon 2.
Mhm.
In this one, Rene Russo is a totally different kind of beast because she's kind of like she's up there with him, so she's actually divides them up a little bit, and yet it does work. I love the fact that it's seamlessly they have the 1, 2, 3 joke again between her and Riggs, and it doesn't seem like it's a bad thing. And then like to watch her kick out that moment, Danny Glover starts going on. She's like, no, watch it. She's got a gift, and even to the point of where they take stuff from like we have a replication of the Jaws series where they're comparing injuries again.
Yep.
And it's kind of a trope now in movies over the course of the years since Jaws made that famously had the famous scene. I loved this one as well, though. I still love that. It's a working scene for me, and it really helps establish Rene Russo and Riggs together as this like couple that's going to happen eventually. You know, it's going to happen eventually. They start off like hating each other. You know, it's going to turn. But I really love her in this. I got to say that again. But I did mention, I want to twist a little bit now. I did mention Joe Pesci.
Real quick.
Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead.
Just before you continue, I want to say Lorna's such a great addition to the franchise. And to your point, like they had done it before with Joe Pesci. Can they make it work again? And that's a hard thing to try to replicate for a second time. You know what I'm saying? Like that's not easy.
No.
You're already messed with the chemistry once. Can you do it again? And we've talked about a lot on here that the most interesting thing about this franchise is that it doesn't lose people as it goes. It gains people. Like anytime someone is added to the family, they appear in the following film. In the following films continually. So when you bring someone like Lorna in, it could have been very easy for the film to lose itself. And especially because, as we saw, like with part 2, you introduce a love interest to take her away again. Do you do that again? Do you want to put Martin Riggs through this again? Do you really want to try to give him a love interest and like evolve him as a character? What is the end game here? And there's a lot of ways to look at that. This could have been a bad decision, but Rene Russo is so good, and her chemistry with Gibson is so good,
off the charts.
It like, to your point, I would have absolutely watched an entire series around her and Gibson later. There's a reason that they worked together again on Ransom. Like Ron Howard was just like, cast them again. Like they're so good together. So, you know, I look back at this one so fondly for that alone.
I think it was a smart move to make. Like I said, you have, if you've done the Riggs lost his wife in the first one before the first one began, you have him lose the girl in 2, and she was not exactly a very action-filled character. She was definitely a damsel in distress kind of character. The only way you have to go is by flipping the script. They flip the script and give Riggs a superhero girlfriend pretty much in a way who's just as good as him and can keep up with him and take care of herself. Gibson doesn't have to save her. She can save him all of the time, and that's what works for it. Moving on from that, I do have to note, this is one of my negatives of the film, is that Rene Russo works so well, but I feel like in this one, Joe Pesci is a little bit of an aside, a little bit of an afterthought. Like they knew he was a popular character, so they had to bring him back. They wanted to bring him back too, because that's what they do. But it feels a little off this time through. There's some good moments with him, but I feel like he got wasted a little bit this time around. And maybe that's partially because Rene Russo is in there. You can't add too much to the mix. What did you feel about Pesci in this one?
I love Leo Getz as a character. I kind of love the whole him trying to sell the house stuff. I actually think that is very funny. There's this great bit when they talk about the car going through the front of the house that you die every single time. I do think that they almost overdo it, and I don't think that Leo really evolves a whole lot between this and this one and the second one, which is why I like Leo so much in the third one or the fourth one, because we'll get to it. There's such a great arc for him, as it were. I really wish that he had more to do in this one. And I think that he gets the short end of the stick for the rest of the storylines that are happening. And I can appreciate what it's going for. I just don't necessarily know if it works.
And I agree with you 100%. I will say I prefer having Pesci at least in the movie rather than not have him in the movie, even if he isn't used. So I'm okay with him being there. I still love seeing because I love the character, and he has some good moments. There's some fun moments. One of the best moments they did that I feel they did actually use him to his proper benefit was when they're looking for Travis, the bad guy, and he recognizes him, and they use his street smart or his criminal background again to figure out where he's from. That felt okay. This is partially what you use him for. Unfortunately, it's kind of a quick thing, although it does lead to shout out to our friend Matty Kearns. I love you, boy. a sudden death prequel, so to speak, as we get Riggs and Gibson in the hockey rink. A little bit of, I know we know how much you
Yeah.
love sudden death.
I
So
love that bit though.
that bit
That
was
bit is
great.
so good. And again, this movie's full of stuff like that.
Yeah, exactly. And that's the time where Joe Pesci is good. So it's not all bad with Pesci. There's definitely some good moments, but at the same time, we both agree. It's just he's underwhelming, underused, and I feel like they definitely get him better. They would correct that in the fourth one.
It also feels like a lot of the jokes from the first one are kind of used again against him, like as a character, down to the whole like, I want to go with you guys, no, and then they just shoot his car tires out. Like they do a lot of the same stuff where it almost feels punching down at that point
Yeah,
at
they fuck
Leo
you
as
at
a
the
character.
okay. They fuck you at the.
That
And they
part's
did it.
great. I mean,
I agree, but it felt like a retread. I feel like it's one of those things, like because I know you do it again in the fourth one, but at the same time, like it felt better in the fourth one. It's almost like one of those times where you tell a joke and it's funny, you tell a joke and it's not so funny the second time around, but then you commit to the bit and still tell it again the next time, it becomes funny again. You know,
yeah,
so that's kind of how it felt to me. This one kind of felt a little bit like, okay, we're waiting for that bit. All right, but that's fine. I mean, it didn't ruin it for me, but it's kind of like, okay, but it is a callback to the other ones like we're doing before. So I
yeah.
mentioned
I
that.
just think that it just becomes a little punching down with the character, but
Right.
all the same, I would still rather he was there than not, as weird as that
Yes.
sounds, because I just like his presence as a character,
Yeah.
and I think he just fleshes out the world so well.
Yeah.
Um, I love we've talked about it a lot, but I love the action beats in this movie. The
Oh yeah.
ice rink is great. The opening car chase after the explosion, when they realize that these guys have armor piercing bullets, is so good. It leads to my favorite line in the movie, which is the once they get to the end and the dude is sit on the hood of the car and he's gone through the windshield, and Riggs is like, "You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say ain't gonna be much." Like that stuff's so good. And even like the great bit at the beginning when before it starts, Riggs as a character is so good, and there's a little bit of this moment of when they have to be beat cops, and he's clearly not handling it super well, and they're trying to give the ticket to the dude who jaywalks,
Right.
and you see the back and forth between him and Murtaugh, and then he's like, "Just give me my gun. I'm just gonna shoot this guy," and just it's so perfectly in line for them trying to amuse themselves.
Right.
And the thing I like about that is we see in action movies and stuff all the time where they try to do these fake beats where you break the team up because of drama or something and
Right.
they aren't going to get along and they won't work together again until they have to. Like this series never does that really.
Thank God.
And I love that when this opens, you could have seen that they had been separated and Murtaugh had been like, you screwed everything up. I was so many days from retirement, and now I don't want to be around you as a beat cop. And they go like their separate directions. No, no, no. This movie just leaves them together as beat cops at the very beginning and them torturing each other instead. That's so much better.
It is. It is. It's less trite. It's less overdone, and I think I agree with you because it adds. It would have added an unnecessary component that we would have had to work through. Would have wasted screen time.
Yeah.
The chemistry of these people is what we like about it. We like them together. We don't need to see them apart. Um, I get that, but it also, and because of that, because of what they did, is instead how they make it. They give you that without going over the top with it. Is the retirement angle, and I got to tell you, there's a couple times where this film is really kind of subtle about some things, but they're really deep moments. Like we have this idea, okay, so Murtaugh is retiring. Mel Gibson Riggs doesn't like freak out about it, but you can tell he's bothered by it because
Mhm.
this is his home. He doesn't know what he's going to do without him, but he never tells Murtaugh that. But there's these moments throughout the script. One of my favorite moments in the entire movie is Murtaugh being starting to be too old for this shit, where he shoots, he lets the gun go off in the locker, and the
Mhm.
gun goes off, and what does Mel Gibson do? Automatically just starts slamming lockers and to cover up for a bit because that's a no-no. When you have a cop and
Yep.
your weapon goes off on the thing, that's like suspension time kind of thing, everything else. And Rick just covers for him without even thinking about it. And he's like, and Murtaugh knows it too. Murtaugh's like, man, I'm getting old. Thank you, kind of thing. He doesn't have to say it, but just that moment of this is who these characters are.
Mhm.
It's a beautiful thing, and that's what leads eventually again to the scene we talked about on the boat. Brothers are like, and that's where Mel Gibson finally gets to yell it out, like, you know what? Like, you didn't think about what this is doing to me. And for Murtaugh's like, I don't care, even though we know he cares. And it's like, it's just, it's well written.
It
Parts of
really
it are
is.
so well written.
And
Parts
it,
of it are not, but parts of it are so well written.
yeah, and again, I think that that's the stuff that Jeffrey Boehm excelled at, and I think that Carrie Fisher, famously known for her script doctoring, probably came in and had a hand in some of those emotional beat type things too. But that's why it's so good. And again, there was another moment you could have done the fake rip the team apart thing to create drama and tension, and they never do that.
Oh yeah, I mean, you could easily have had Murtaugh be jealous of Lorna or something. That was the
Yeah.
beat that would have happened. Like, oh, you're with her now. I mean, he had that beat. He's like, I slept with her, and I should have done that. Whatever. But like Murtaugh, like never worries about it. He's like, okay, sure,
Yeah.
let's move on.
And you
It's
know what?
better for
We
him.
haven't talked about this yet.
Okay.
Lethal Weapon 3 probably has the weakest villain
Gonna get
story
there, but
in the
yeah.
franchise,
Yeah.
but Stuart Wilson as Jack Travis, no matter how underwhelming the arc might be, he's real good in this movie.
Yeah, I'll
That
give you
scene
that.
when he goes in and he sees Billy, like, because he's this dirty cop, and he goes in, the goodbye Billy, and just shoots him real fast. Also, shout out to Mark Pellegrino
You
being
love him.
Billy. For those who don't know, I'm a huge Lost fan, so it's just funny seeing Jacob in such an early role, and he's just a good character actor, and so it's fun seeing him in this. But like,
Also, shout out to Supernatural fans also as well for
yeah, I was gonna say
sure.
he is in that, isn't he?
Yes, he is.
Yeah,
Lucifer. Very good. I love him in a lot of things. There's a lot of the movies, shows he's been in. I
and of
really
course
enjoy him in.
Dexter.
Yep.
So, but I really like Jack Travis's character. I don't think that it's necessarily the most interesting and well written at times, but Stuart Wilson gives it his all, because he's another one. He was one of those plug and play character actors in the 90s that you could put him in anything. Like, if you've seen The Mask of Zorro, you probably recognize him. He was one of the villains in that. Like,
hmm
that he was in Vertical Limit. He's been
Yep.
in all sorts of stuff. And of course, for us, we're both big Edgar Wright fans, and I love that Edgar Wright even looked at him and was like, I'm going to put him in Hot Fuzz, because he
Right.
considered him like a prototypical action villain type, which
For that
is
movie.
kind of, yeah, and for that movie, he populated that movie with so many actors that you recognized from stuff like that, right?
hmm
So it was just kind of a nice nod to that, I feel
hmm
like. And he's great in Enemy of the State. This dude's been in so much shit.
Yeah, you'll also have to shout out he was in The Rock as General
Yep.
Al Kramer.
He's in
I'm a
everything.
Red Harris fan. I can't let that go. Also, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles 3, if you remember, he's plays that guy.
Yeah.
It's like just a weird listing of things at times, but some of the greatest action movies, like Enemy of the State, another great one he's in.
Yeah.
He's good.
I mean, he was in No Escape.
Yeah.
He's in Unstoppable, the bad Wesley Snipes one. Like, the dude was in all sorts of things, is the point.
Yeah.
He was just the kind of dude that you recognized. And so he really works in the film. I wish that the character had more to do, but I also like that this one dealt with this idea that there is crooked cops within that no one's really paying attention to.
Right.
And Rene Russo kind of starting to get close to it, and then finding that she's being pushed back, only to have Riggs and Murtaugh get involved, and that pushes everything forward. Like, that stuff's great.
Right.
I just wish that the Travis character had more to do.
Yeah, I agree with that entirely. Just because I felt very underwhelmed by him. I don't know, maybe it's because we had Gary Busey in the first one, and of course, diplomatic immunity became such a big part of the second one.
Too, yeah.
So this one kind of felt like there was he didn't have that moment, or he didn't have those moments that really stuck out. The ending fight was great. He had a lot of little moments, but I kind of felt like he was secondary to the story, which I get because we have a bigger story going on with Rene Russo's character, with obviously Riggs and Murtaugh going through what Murtaugh is going through. There's a lot there, But I feel like he needed a little bit more to make him a real standout villain. Definitely not his fault. He does everything he is told to do. He does everything he's supposed to do. But at the end of the day, he's just not a very memorable villain of an action movie.
Yeah, and that's a bummer because I think that the one thing that Lethal Weapon 1, 2, and 4 do is have very interesting, compelling, memorable villains.
Right.
Like
Yeah.
it's like the Die Hard movies, right? I think that Die Hard 1 through 4 actually have very compelling and interesting villains all the way across. And I don't even love Die Hard 2, but like at least the general character is an interesting villain.
Yeah.
So the fact that Lethal Weapon 3 craters there a little bit is just kind of a bummer because I think that the best action movies, a lot of them also feature great villains.
The best action movies have always featured the great villains, and that's what makes it good because you have to have a great villain to have a great hero. If you don't have a great villain, they're not overcoming anything. And that's what struggles a little bit.
100%. And I would argue, and we've talked about this privately in the past, but like you look at the Pirates of the Caribbean franchise, and the weakest entry in that franchise, in my opinion, it's still watchable, but it's the second one. You know why? Because Jeffrey Rush isn't in it until the last 30 seconds.
Yeah, there's a waste not having him in that.
Yeah, and so you look at that, and these great action films and adventure films and stuff, they're only as good as the villain within a lot of the time.
Yeah, 100%.
So that's what makes it a bummer because of it.
It's a little bit of a bummer because of that. Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, I mean, look, I guess this also comes from the fact that you and I talk about it. We love horror films, right? And stabby, like we joke about it all the time. But the truth is if I didn't like these horror characters, would I keep going back? No. And you're following the villain. I'm going for the villain. Now, the best horror movies have to have a good protagonist in the middle of it so that I actually give a shit that they survive and are getting away from the stabby killer.
That's exactly. It's the reverse. It's the reverse. A good villain needs a good hero as well.
Right. So I could keep going on about it. I'm not going to, but it's kind of a bummer. It's the biggest, I think, chain around this movie's neck that really holds it down is that it's just lacking that because the rest of the movie is so engaging. Like you're seeing this stuff going on with Murtaugh dealing with the fact that he killed a kid to have this relationship with Lorna. You're trying to do all of these things and it just never quite pops off in the way that it needs to. And that just kind of sucks.
Yeah, I agree. And this is why, like I said up top, I said it was uneven. That's part of the reason because there is some great moments in there and it has potential to be an overall great movie. This had the potential to be just as good as the first two. It just loses its way just enough where it's like, okay, unfortunately, you're not quite there. Not quite there. I think honestly part of that is the loss of Shane Black. I think that I will lead out to. I think that this film could have used a little more Shane Black as far as the earthiness of it to really settle it down and to give it that depth that the first two have. This one has some depth, better than a lot of other action movies of its time. No
absolutely.
doubt. But it doesn't. I think it pales in comparison. If you put this up against another action movie of the 80s or 90s, possibly, this is probably going to come out pretty favorably overall to some of it. It's just that it's got a couple of champions to look up to. So
the bummer is at the end of the day, and this is just kind of honest and true, is that you can't look at this franchise in any other vacuum other than there was only downhill from here. Right. When you got to 3. And it's very rare for movie series to traject up. You know, if for the audio listeners you can't see, I'm like, you don't just go uphill all the time. Right. You eventually have to come back down.
Right.
Lethal Weapon 3 was that one. But the truth of the matter is that it's still better than most action sequels. Like it's not super standardy in overwhelming way. Again, the action beats are super fun and there's a lot to like about the character dynamics. Again, I mean, you look at the stuff with Lorna and Riggs, that is one of the better action movie relationships maybe ever, and that's because the chemistry is so damn good. There's a lot to love just across the board. I just wish that it had a better villain at the center to like push it up. But I do think that the fight sequence at the end at the in this like construction yard, for this bigger suburb. It's super cool. It's super fun. It's very reminiscent of Murtaugh's fight in the attic in Lethal Weapon 2. Like, I like that we're kind of setting it in the shell of these houses. Again, kind of a mirror back to things that have happened previously in the franchise. So that's kind of fun. It's just, I wish that there was more to the rest of the movie.
I agree. No, actually, I will say the last action sequence might be my favorite of the three movies so far as like the epicness of it, the bigness of it, the fun beats to it. I mean, there are definitely good parts. Like, but 2, I feel gets a little lost in the boat, whereas they have a lot more open space here, a lot more fun things to do. Having Rene Russo's character, giving him a little more, instead of just focusing on one, you get a little more chaoticness to it, a little more kinetic energy to it. I think that's what the first two films, if they first suffer at all, is it the fact that it gets almost too mano a mano of Mel Gibson and Gary Busey at the end, or then you have them. This has a lot of chaotic energy and kinetic gunfire and everything else. And that's partly because the villain is not as magnetic as some other ones. So you have to kind of sprinkle in the other things, but the other things that lead to more fun action bits. The whole truck going around, the fire going around, the explosions and everything. It's a lot of fun. I'll shout out the fact that I love the fact when Rene Russo did 1, 2, and she just goes 3 and runs out, and they're like, wait, what the? God.
Yeah. It's so good. And again, I'll say, like, you look at all the action beats throughout this movie, that's the one thing that I remember more than anything, I feel like, is just how magnificent all this stuff looks. Like, dude, that shot of Riggs going over the side of the freeway, is wild. And again, shot in such a specific way because it's Jean de Bont.
Right.
So it just looks gorgeous, but it's fucking exhilarating. It's one of the best stunts in an 80s, 90s action film, in my opinion, because it's kind of small, but exciting and fun. And there's a world where it's very clear in this one, because there's a lot of usage of martial arts, and the fourth one also has a lot of usage of martial arts. And it's very clear that Donner and everyone are big fans of like Hong Kong cinema. So they're kind of riding the coattails of the stuff they're seeing Jackie Chan do and Lee doing, and they're like, we could try to do something like that. And so they go for this big stunt, throwing a dude off the side of a freeway, and it's fucking good. It's a great stunt.
It is a lot of good stunts in there. Yeah, I will say there's a couple of little other tidbits we haven't brought up yet that I want to kind of, as we start wrapping things up here. I did love the little joke, the running joke they have with Murtaugh's new girlfriend. We have this like completely over the top chaotic character. There's a cop who's like, I mean, like it's definitely loud and proud, but like it's definitely leaves some humorous moments. But Dolores, that's who it is. Yes,
Dolores.
Jam in my jelly, my jelly roll.
Dude, she kills me in this. She is so hysterical.
It adds to it adds to the Riggs and Murtaugh ribbing each other. Riggs loves ribbing Murtaugh, obviously, and that gives him some more ammo, so it's good for that. That's one of my bits. I want to throw out there the dog biscuits is a great running gag as well. Trying to stop smoking, and he gets come on this. He starts, not bad. And all the time he's like, I love the fact that you got these. I'm trying to kick my dog biscuit habit.
It's just so good.
It's so funny. I want to bring Mel Gibson and dogs again. Anytime you put a pup on screen, I'm going to be happy, especially a pup that's not dying. Let me clarify that. And Riggs, the whole sequence where like Riggs and Lorna are meeting this dog, and Lorna's like scared out of her mind, and he's doing the whole over the top. I'm going to get down on my hands and knees and watch the dog. It's so fun. It's ridiculous. You could never have that happen in real life, but it makes for a fun bit.
It's so good. And, I will credit them where credit's due. Leo does play a part in how they end up figuring everything out at the end with the shell company stuff, which was good. So Leo at least does have a usage in this, which I thought was great. You got to give credit to him like continually trying to sell the Murtaugh house, and the like ending beat of them being like, actually, we're no longer going to sell the house. And he's like, wait, what? So good.
Such a Leo moment.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's so good, and I loved that. Also, this was one of the very first movies I remember ever seeing that had a post-credit scene, and I think it wasn't until I told you about it that you even knew that there was a post-credit scene. You had never seen it.
You're absolutely right. Because I was not ready for that. I totally forgot. Like it wasn't a thing back then, really, and I just didn't even think about it. And then I never went back
Yeah.
until I finally saw it. I'm like, oh yeah, awesome.
Yeah, and for those who don't know, like it's basically a bookend to the opening of the film. They're pulling up to another building, and you hear Riggs and Murtaugh talking, and they hear there's potentially another bomb in this building, and they're going to pull up, and they're like, we shouldn't go in, and then the building explodes, and you hear Murtaugh being like, they're never going to believe this shit. We had nothing to do with it. It's so good, and then
That's
it's
good.
them ending on the "we're too old for this shit."
It's just
It's a great moment. I love it so much, and that was one of those. The first time I saw it, because I used to leave VHSs on, and I would just kind of let them play through because old VCRs and some of the old TVs, they'd actually, if you let it play to the end, it would rewind itself.
yeah.
So I would just let stuff play through, and so the first time I ever watched it, I was letting it play through, and then there was a scene at the end, and I was like, wait, what?
What? Really?
Yeah, and it
Boring?
was the first time I ever was like, "Oh, that's interesting." And then, of course, like it wouldn't be until later that you start to see stuff like,
Yeah.
was it Masters of the Universe? You realize has one. The original Fast and the Furious has one. Like Pirates of the Caribbean had one. Slowly but surely, they start popping up more, and then Marvel made it an entire personality trait. So,
Absolutely. I think the first one I remember ever seeing was Ferris Bueller's Days Off.
oh yeah.
I think that was
Well,
the
and
very
that one
first
was
one.
because you stayed all the way through because there was a scene playing through the
Right.
credits too.
Right. That's true. That's true. That's part of it. But at the end there, that was kind of the one I remember happening. But I think that was my first one. But yeah, it kind of becomes a thing where it kind of slowly every once in a while happens. Now, you almost expect it now. Even in every movie now, there's actually, I think, an app at one point called Stinger where you look up, is there anything credit-wise? Should I stick around for the credits? Should I not? Kind of thing. Marvel definitely made that a new thing for everybody, all films. But one last thing I did want to touch on, I should leave it on positive, but there was one kind of mixed bag for me. I'm kind of interested to hear your thoughts about it. We have a brief moment. I feel like it's trying to ape a little bit of Lethal Weapon 2. We get the rookie cop. The rookie cop gets introduced. He's at the shooting range. He's like young and cocksure, and he's just whatever. And they start going after the guys when they're raiding the LA base for their arms, for their weapons. He comes out, he's like, "Oh, somebody's going down. It's going down." And he's like, "You got protection, kid?" "Yeah, my wallet." "No, your vest, dude." But of course, we end up with a sad note of him actually getting killed in the firefight.
Yeah.
And I feel like it's like I don't. You introduce him to kill him. You barely give him any time, and like that's like his whole role. I'm kind of like I feel like either he should have lived, and like that would have been a good thing because I don't think they needed any more. They didn't need any more motivation at that point. Like they wanted this guy dead. They wanted to take this guy down. It felt like that was a cheap ad for motivation that just didn't need to happen.
I don't disagree with you actually on that. It definitely feels like a character that they just introduced to create drama. And the weird thing is we already have a character in this for that, and that's Murtaugh killing the kid.
Yeah.
So it feels like weird, unnecessary extra sadness.
Yeah.
It feels like there's a lot of that because then again, like the Billy character used
Yeah.
literally as a pawn to be killed by Jack Travis. Like there's a lot of those characters in this one actually. Now in hindsight, and it's not my favorite trope. It's not necessary to this movie. I feel like personally, it doesn't like hurt the movie or anything. It's just a weird thing that's there.
Yeah, it was enough that I wanted to bring it up just to mention it, but again, yeah, it does not ruin anything. It just kind of like it's kind of like just a moment where kind of it almost takes me out. I feel like it's a little bit of the, I feel like it's a little sign of that. There's a little bit too many cooks in the kitchen, too many drafts, too many trying to make things work and everything else.
Oh, totally.
It's like it's okay. Well, I get if that had been there and something else hadn't been, it might have worked out better if they had developed him more, got a little more time to spend with him. Then it works. Otherwise, it's kind of like what the heck? A little bit of a waste. It could have been edited out, and not much would have been lost. But yeah, that's where we are. Any other things that you want to point out before we wrap things up? Are you good?
No, I mean, I think ultimately, where I lay with this one is it's a very fun, very good, not great entry in the franchise. Again, as I said up top, like no shock. I think this one is the weakest. It just is. And that's kind of a bummer. but that's not a bad thing. It's not like a bad movie, and I enjoy talking about it still, and I enjoy watching it every time I put it on because it's still fun, and I still like the characters, and it's ultimately those characters that make me love the movie and continue going back to it. To me, that's the most important part. And the funniest part is that the audiences were very vocal about how much they liked this movie. This movie made $321 million.
Damn.
$321 million in 1992. That was almost $100 million more, just a little under than what the second movie made at the box office
on a
3
budget
years
of
before.
35 million.
Yeah. They spent $5 million more on the second one on the third one than they did the second, and did almost $100 million more.
I wish so hard. I made this clear a little while ago that we really, not we need it, but I would love to see the return of the mid-level action movie. Like Michael Bay's Ambulance was exactly similar type of thing. John Wick, 50 million dollar movies that can make you a bunch if it's done right and a lot of fun. You don't need to make every movie, doesn't have to be 300 million, a $200 million budget, $100 billion budget.
Even Bad Boys for Life was like 85 million.
Well, yeah, and you know that's probably closer where we are on mid-level budgets nowadays as it is.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's what I like to see. I think you can do so much with less, and you don't need to spend all that money. That's what studios do. I don't understand how studios can't make that work. That used to be the bread and butter of studios. I mean, now they throw all the money they can, all trying to hit that $1 billion level. And that's fine. I get why you do that, but there's room for these too, and they should be pushed. But
I mean, I've been making this argument for a long time, as you're aware. I truly believe that budgets and things have been terribly out of hand as of late, and I think that these kind of movies remind me that this is kind of what I want to see continue.
Right.
I miss this type of filmmaking, but that's why I'm glad stuff like Bad Boys for Life and the John Wick films, although the John Wick films even at this point have gotten very expensive, I feel like, comparative to the original, which was obviously made for like 40 million.
Yeah. Do we know what the latest one is? How much the latest
one is? I'm going to guess it's probably between 80 and 100 just from the trailer. And, you know, we also have heard that this one is 3 hours long.
Yeah.
And there's a lot more people in this one comparative, I think, than the other ones. So I think that plays a part as well.
3 was $75 million budget, which isn't horrible.
No, that's pretty good actually. Yeah. So they've kept it within what we're talking about. Yeah. I would just like more of this. And Lethal Weapon 3 reminds me that this type of stuff is super cool and should be done this way. And it's like, I know that they were talking about at one point there was going to be a remake of Under Siege at Warner Brothers, and it was like, yeah, do that for $50-60 million. Do a remake of Under Siege.
I mean, I guess you could say that there are a few of these films out there. I mean, like a lot of the Liam Neeson films are kind of that level. A lot of the Jerry B. George Butler movies are kind of like that. And Greenland was like 35 million.
They could also be good.
Yeah, well, I mean, I like a lot. Yes and no. I actually think a lot of them are good, although Liam Neeson kind of makes a little too many. I think he gets a little lost in translation sometimes. They should focus on a series with them. Like Jerry B does. Jerry B with the Angel Has series. Fallen.
Yeah.
Is something exactly the kind of thing we're talking about, I think. Something Liam
Neeson and I actually do have a soft spot for the Has Fallen movies, to be fair. So you
makes sense. That's another one we're going to add to the queue at some point, I think.
Oh,
we're going to be here for the rest of our lives. I'm okay with that.
It's fair. This one is it's a good movie though, man.
It is.
It's not a great movie, but it's a fun movie. And I really, really push for anyone who has not revisited in a while. It is worth revisiting just for the character dynamics and the introduction of Lorna, played by Rene Russo. I think that stuff alone just really makes the movie worth watching.
The good news is there is not a unwatchable film in this series. That's a good thing. You can watch all 4 films and be severely entertained. There's ups and downs, and there's we're going to find out. We're about to find out because we're going to do our rankings. But even if this is your worst entry in the franchise, then you're doing good. You're doing good.
Oh, there is one moment that I did not bring up that I wanted to bring up.
Okay, yeah. Before we rank it, let's do it.
There is a really great scene, and this is one of the things we really haven't talked about just in general, but with the stuff that happens after Murtaugh shoots this the kid who was friends with his son, he's really worried about his relationship with his son, and they have this moment where they're talking about shaving, and he
Yeah.
realizes that like his relationship with his son is actually okay.
Yeah.
That is truly, truly wonderful.
Yeah.
I think that Glover really sells that entire moment. I think that Alan Scarf really, or not Alan Scarf, sorry, Damon Hines,
Yes.
Nick Murtaugh. They really sell the moment together. It's truly, truly special and one of the best human moments in the franchise. Period. Um, this movie has a lot of little beats like that that get overlooked in talking about how lesser it is than the first two, but that moment is just aces.
And I will actually add, I think in that case, less is more. There is a temptation that you could add another emotional beat where his son resents him for killing his friend, and like it would have been like another one. Like it's too much. It's too much. It adds too many. Like there's too many already in there. Too many story points already in there. We already know Murtaugh feels guilty about it, and we see the funeral scene hits that home well, and the yacht scene hits that home well. Having his son forgive him is a nice, heartwarming moment that you need to balance out those other moments. So I agree. It's a well written sequence. It's a good choice to have it that way. Yeah, I like it. I like it a lot.
Yeah, I like it a lot too.
All right, let's get into our rankings out of 1 to 11 because we always turn up to 11 here on PLD Projects. Where do we get this? Lethal Weapon. Well, just a reminder to everybody out there and to ourselves, as we're bi-weekly, we're older men and tend to forget what we rank things at. Lethal Weapon 1, I gave a 10. You gave a 10.5. Lethal Weapon 2, I gave a 10.5. You gave an 11, a perfect 11. So what score do you give Lethal Weapon 3 on a scale of 1 to 11?
I'm going to go ahead and give this one, I'm going to go ahead and give it a 7.5.
7.5. You know what? This is a franchise where we don't have much differing opinions as far as like scores go.
Yeah.
Sorry, I know Brandon Buckingham likes us when we start yelling at each other and fighting with each other. But at this point, I don't think we're going to get that because I feel the same way. It's a little lesser than the first two for sure. I was going to give it a solid 7. It actually is ranked. Okay. I think everything. It's kind of funny how every episode so far you're always a 0.5 higher than I am. We're basically the same level. So
look at us. Look at us. Who would have thought?
Who would have thought?
Not me.
Not me either. That's going to do it for us folks tonight here on Two Mediocre White Dudes on Film. We're going to, I know we announced the bi-weekly schedule, but it looks like I'll talk about it on air since we're on here. We'll get this out on air. Scream comes out just in time for our next episode. I think maybe we bump the Weapon 4 and we do Scream 6 next week. And then maybe we'll do an extra episode the following week. So we'll actually do 3 in a row. Old school style, even though we just started the bi-weekly schedule. Do Scream 6, then Lethal Weapon 4, and you can move on from there. Does that sound doable to you?
Probably, but we're going to work through it. We're going to make this happen.
Well, it's work. Either way, we're going to do Scream 6. There's a chance we could actually do 2 in 1 week. We could do a Scream 6 on a Sunday night and then record Lethal Weapon 4 that same week. Maybe we'll have 2 episodes in a week, maybe. Who knows?
Yeah.
We'll find out. We'll finish that off air. But either way, Scream 6 is coming. Lethal Weapon 4 is coming. And then we're going to move on from there. Yeah, that's great, man. Where can the folks find you, my friend?
Twitter, Instagram, PJ_Campbell, hanging out here, doing stuff with this idiot. Same as it ever was.
It's same as it ever was. Yes, I agree with that. I want to shout out. You can find me on patreon.com/PLD Projects. We have a great Patreon there with a bunch of different cool people in the chats there. Shouting out specifically Matthew Kearns, shouting out Brandon Buckingham, Jeff Alterman, John Lestrina, and the rest of you. I could not do this without you, so I really appreciate your support. If this is your first time here at the podcast or on YouTube, if you're on YouTube specifically, hit that subscribe, hit that like, leave us a good comment. If you're listening to us audio-wise, leave a comment. Rate us 5 if you can. Everything you want to do, just help us out. We're trying to move a little forward, moving forward in a good way. We are working towards a modest goal on YouTube of 500 subscribers. We're getting there slowly but surely, but as long as the quality is there, that's all I care about. But you can find me on here every other week on Two Mediocre White Dudes on Film. You can find me the other alternate week on Class Action with Matty Gunner and Richard Derek Jarvie. You can find me weekly doing Crown Jewels, a journey through Queen. I go through every song in the Queen catalog. which, by the way, you can actually find on the alternative YouTube channel. It's on the same YouTube, it's the same audio feed, but for the YouTube channel, it's the PLD Project's Crown Jewels channel, which I opened up recently, reopened up, I should say. That's where all the music stuff's going to go. My Queen remixes, the Queen Crown Jewels. I might even put my old album on there. We'll have to see if I can convince myself to do that. And finally, back to the PLD Project's prime, so to speak. Holy Snokes. 2 episodes a week for the forthcoming month, at least for me and my Matty Gunner, covering Mandalorian Season 3 and the rest of the Bad Batch Season 2 and all the news that has to go along with that. Of course, we got a couple other podcasts coming up. I'll announce now. Harris Dance is going to happen sometime in late spring, maybe early summer. I'll finally get some of those out there where I go through Ed Harris bit by bit. And I'm also going to be doing Review, a journey through V, the old 80s sci-fi show, which was my Star Wars on TV when I was a kid. Might be a niche audience, but you should watch that and then watch our show. The original V miniseries is a classic, and I can't understate that enough. And I have a big interview coming up on that, so stay tuned for that. And that's it. Paul_Denuzzi on Twitter. You can do that as well. But until next time, then, guys, stay mediocre, because you can never underestimate the power of mediocrity.
Goodbye, friends.